CRIEnglish.com, connecting China with the world.
It's amazing, there are so many cars here now. When I was here in 1985, it was a sea of bicycles. I was told that Beijing had about 7.5 million people and 4 million bicycles. Not many people had cars. The only cars that were around belonged to the work units, the Danhui. When I was living in Beijing, there were no advertisements, so it was quite surprising to go on the subway and see the advertisements being projected on the side so that you see advertisements through the windows as you're riding. Never, never, never would you see advertisements when I was living in China. And you wouldn't see the high-rise buildings, very, very few tall buildings. So now it seems to look more like Hong Kong than the Beijing that I remember.
In the mid-'80s, Caroline Francis quit her job at BBC Radio and took a gig as a foreign expert at Radio Beijing. She worked for the English service, which broadcast to people around the world, but could also be heard in Beijing.
It says Radio Beijing in the center with the logo.
It was popular amongst the expat community and Chinese who wanted to learn English. That said, back in '85, most people in China didn't speak English, so Caroline had to quickly pick up some survival Mandarin.
Ni hao and so much more. These survival Chinese books and phrases for tourists were useful then and they're still useful now, but I'm sure they are long out of print.
So is Beijing's English language phone book, another relic that Caroline has held on to.
When I was living in Beijing, most people did not have phones. Phones were very, very rare. A few of the Danhui, the work units, they would have phones, but most people, individuals, would not have phones.
They also didn't have the variety of food choices that Beijingers have today.
We're in front of a little hutong shop here, and it's similar to the ones that were around when I was living in Beijing between 1985 and 1987, but there is so much more available in it, it's unbelievable. For example, the first winter that I was in Beijing, the only vegetable you could get was cabbage. Bananas maybe in the summertime, and oranges and tangerines, but I don't remember seeing this kind of variety of stuff available in a tiny little store in the depths of winter. Chinese were not into milk products at all, so you would never see ice cream like this ice cream over here. You'd never see a whole freezer full of different kinds of ice cream. That just was not available.
You also wouldn't see electronic scales, cash registers, or calculators.
Everybody had an abacus. In each store, they would have an abacus. Wherever anything was sold, people would use an abacus to work out exactly how much things cost.
When Caroline wasn't exploring Beijing's hutongs, she was in the kitchen.
So now I'm going back in the kitchen, 25 years later. When I was a foreign expert at Radio Beijing from 1985 through 1987, one of the things I did was a weekly cooking show. It was a lot of fun because I would go to the best restaurants, a lot of them were in the major hotels, and interview the chefs on how they made particular recipes. I think I covered over 50 recipes, and I learned a lot about Chinese cooking.
And nobody leaves China without at least one bizarre story. Unfortunately, Caroline's took place in a toilet.
So the first time I got paid, I got this thick stack of 10 yuan notes. And I was wearing a Chinese tracksuit with very small pockets, and I couldn't fit the money, this great big wad of money, in my pocket. So I just stuck it inside my pants. And then I went off in a hutong right near Tiananmen, and it was a very traditional area, and there was a communal bathroom. And I needed to go to the bathroom, so off I go, and I forget I have all this money in my pants. And of course it all falls in. Clearly stuff like this had happened before, because this old lady that was the guardian of the toilet came with these great big wooden tongs and she picked up every single note and washed it under the tap. Each note, washed it under the tap, and so then I got my money back. But never ever again did I make that same mistake. Talk about me throwing all my salary down the toilet, I actually did.